Edward woke before the alarm, as he always did. The sky outside his small bedroom was still gray. A thin line of light slipped between the curtains and painted a pale stripe across the floor. He lay on his back for a moment, listening. The house was quiet. No kettle whistling. No soft humming from the kitchen. No footsteps. Only the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. He turned his head to the side. On the nightstand, there was a pair of reading glasses, an old Bible, and a framed photograph. The frame was a little scratched at the corners. He had meant to buy a new one for years, but never did. In the photograph, a woman with bright, kind eyes smiled at the camera. Her hair was pulled back. She wore a simple dress and a thin gold necklace. Edward reached out and touched the glass with the tips of his fingers. His old hand, lined and spotted, looked strange next to the younger face inside the frame. "Good morning, Margaret," he whispered. His voice sounded rough and small in the still room. He took a slow breath and sat up, his joints protesting. His knees hurt, as they did every morning. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, and waited for the brief wave of dizziness to pass. He did not rush. There was nowhere he needed to be. No one waiting for him in the next room. He stood, reached for his robe, and slipped his arms into the sleeves. The fabric was soft from years of use. He tied the belt in a loose knot and shuffled toward the door. The hallway was dim, lit only by the early morning light, leaking under the front door. On the right was the spare room, once a small study, later a guest room, now just a place where boxes gathered dust. On the left was the bathroom. The door slightly open, the tile cold to the touch. He passed them both and moved toward the kitchen. The floorboards creaked under his slow steps. Each creak was familiar, like an old song he knew by heart. In the kitchen, the air felt cooler. The table stood by the window. A small wooden table they had bought together many years ago. Two chairs faced each other. Only one had been used for a long time. Above the table, on the wall, hung another photograph of Margaret. In this one, she was standing by the sea, hair blown by the wind, laughing at something out of frame. Edward filled the kettle and placed it on the stove. He turned the knob and waited for the blue flame to appear, then lowered the heat. He moved slowly to the cupboard. 1 cup for tea, 1 saucer, a small tin of loose leaves. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic. He did not have to think about what he was doing. His body remembered. While the water heated, he went to the table and sat in his usual chair. The wood was worn where his hands had rested for years. He placed his palms flat on the surface, and stared at the empty chair across from him. He swallowed. His chest felt heavy, as if someone had placed a stone inside it years ago, and never taken it out. On the table, just in front of him, was a single photograph. It was the same one from his bedside, but larger. Margaret in her favorite yellow dress, standing in their old garden. A basket of flowers at her side. Edward leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. He looked into the eyes of the woman in the picture. "I should have told you," he murmured. The kettle began to hum softly in the background. He did not move yet. His gaze stayed fixed on the photograph. He remembered the way her hand used to feel in his. Warm, small, yet somehow strong. He remembered her laugh, sharp and joyful, filling the room. He remembered the way she would look at him when she wanted him to say something he could never quite say. The kettle whistled, louder now. He stood, slowly, and turned off the stove. He poured the hot water over the tea leaves, and watched the color spread through the cup. The small, ordinary act calmed him a little. He carried the cup back to the table, one careful step at a time. His hand shook slightly, but he did not spill. He set the cup down on the saucer and lowered himself into the chair again. Steam rose from the tea. After breakfast, Edward rinsed his cup and plate at the sink. The water ran warm over his hands. He moved slowly, careful not to drop the porcelain. He set the dish in the rack and turned off the tap. The kitchen felt a little too quiet again. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. He wiped his hands on a towel and turned around. His eyes moved from the table to the window, then to the narrow doorway that led to the rest of the house. For a while, he simply stood there. He knew every corner of the small home. It had not changed much in years, but it did not feel empty to him. It felt full of traces, full of echoes. He took a breath and stepped out of the kitchen. The hallway was short, lined with framed photographs. He had walked this path thousands of times, yet each walk felt a little different, depending on which memory chose to wake up. On the wall to his right was a picture of their wedding day. Margaret's dress was simple but elegant. He wore a suit that did not fit quite right in the shoulders. They both looked shy and happy, standing too close to each other in front of the church doors. He paused and looked at it. "We were so young," he said softly. His voice did not echo, but it seemed to linger in the narrow space. Next to the wedding photo was another one, taken years later. Margaret was in the garden, bent over a row of flowers, her hair tied back with a scarf. The sunlight caught her profile. She was not looking at the camera, but he could see the smile at the corner of her mouth. He reached out and adjusted the frame by a tiny fraction, even though it was hardly crooked. It was a habit. He liked things to sit straight, as if order could hold the past together. He moved on. The first room on the left had once been a study. Later, they had put a fold-out bed in there for guests. Now, the door was closed most days. He hesitated, then turned the knob and pushed it open. Dust floated in the air, visible in thin beams of light that slipped through the curtains. There were boxes stacked against one wall, a small bookshelf, and a desk with a chair. He stepped inside and ran his hand along the back of the chair. Margaret used to sit there in the afternoons. She wrote letters, recipes, and sometimes short reflections. She never showed him. "You and your papers," he murmured. "Always writing something." He pulled the chair back slightly and sat down. The cushion was a bit flattened, but he could still remember how it felt when she sat there. One leg tucked behind the other, pen moving across the page. On the desk lay an old lamp, a dried-up pen, and a small notebook with a faded floral cover. He paused, then reached for the notebook. His thumb brushed over the worn edge. For a moment, he thought about opening it. He imagined seeing her handwriting again, looping and neat, capturing thoughts she had never spoken out loud. But something inside him pulled back. He was not sure why. Perhaps he feared what he might find. Perhaps he feared there would be nothing of importance at all. He set the notebook down again, exactly where it had been. "I'll leave you alone," he whispered, almost as if he were speaking to Margaret herself. He stood up and pushed the chair in. The room smelled faintly of old paper and wood polish. He left the door open a crack and stepped back into the hallway. Further down the hall was the living room. He entered it slowly, as if stepping into a fragile memory. The room was small but warm. Two armchairs faced each other near the window. A low coffee table sat between them. A bookshelf stood against one wall, filled with paperbacks, a few old records, and a row of framed photographs along the top. In the corner, near the window, stood the piano. Its dark wood had dulled over the years, but the keys were still clean. A lace runner draped over the top held 3 items: a ceramic vase, a small clock, and a silver-framed photograph of Margaret. Edward walked toward the piano and stopped just beside it. "You haven't had a tune in a while," he said gently to the instrument. There had been a time when music filled this room. In the evenings, Margaret would sit on the bench, her fingers gliding over the keys. She did not play perfectly, but she played with feeling. She liked old hymns, simple love songs, and melodies from movies they had watched together. "Play one more," he used to say, leaning back in his chair, eyes half closed. She would laugh and say, "Which one, mister?" "Quiet." He would shrug, too shy to make a request, and she would choose something herself. Now the piano stood silent. He had not lifted the fall board in years. His fingers hovered over it for a brief moment. He thought about pressing a key, just one, to hear the sound. But he let his hand fall to his side. He was afraid the note would come out thin and out of tune, like a voice left unused for too long. He turned toward the armchairs. One had a folded blanket draped over the back, the one that had been Margaret's chair. The other, plain and bare, was his. He lowered himself into his chair and looked across at the empty one. The distance between the two seats felt larger than it really was. He rested his hands on the arms of the chair and let his head sink back. "How many evenings did we sit here?" he wondered aloud. He could see it clearly. Her feet tucked under her, a cup of tea in her hands, the light of the lamp soft on her face. She would talk about small things: a neighbor's new car, the roses that needed trimming, a show she had heard about on the radio. He would listen, nod, offer a quiet comment now and then. He had believed, in those days, that listening was enough, that his steady presence said everything she needed to know. Now he was not so sure. He leaned forward and looked at the small clock on the piano. Its hands ticked on, patient and firm, much like the one in the kitchen. Time had moved, whether he spoke or not. His gaze shifted to the bookshelf. Along the top, the framed photographs were lined up neatly. Some were of friends, some were of distant cousins, most were of Margaret. He stood again and walked to the shelf. He picked up one frame at random. In this picture, they were at the seaside. The wind had tossed his hair and pushed her scarf to one side. She was laughing, leaning into him, her hand hooked through his arm. His own face was turned toward her, almost surprised by her joy. He squinted at his younger self, at the half-smile on his lips. "You never did know what to do with all that laughter, did you?" he muttered. He set the frame back and picked up another. Here she stood in the church hall, serving soup at a charity lunch. She wore an apron and held a ladle. She was talking to an older woman, their heads leaning close together as they shared some quiet comment. He remembered that day. She had come home tired but pleased, saying, "It feels good to do something that matters, doesn't it?" He had nodded and said, "Yes," but he had not found many words beyond that. He put the photo down and rubbed his thumb along the edge of the shelf. The house did not feel empty to him. It felt watched, not in a frightening way, but in a quiet, honest way. Every room seemed to hold a record of who they had been. Every object felt like a witness. He walked to the window and parted the curtains. Outside, the street was calm. A few cars passed. A dog barked in the distance. A woman walked by with a shopping bag, head bent against the chill. He watched her for a moment and then let the curtain fall back into place. His eyes moved to the corner near the window, where a small plant sat on a stool. The leaves were green, though a few were beginning to curl at the edges. Margaret had brought that plant home from a church sale one spring. "This one is stubborn," she had said. "It survives anything." He bent down and touched the soil with his finger. It felt dry. "Sorry," he whispered. "I forgot yesterday." He went to the kitchen, filled a small watering can, and came back. He poured gently until the earth darkened. The act gave him a strange sense of comfort. It was something he could still do for her, even if she was not there to see it. He straightened up slowly and sighed. The living room, the hallway, the little study, each space tugged at different parts of his memory. Some memories were tender, others were sharp, like glass. There were arguments too, though they were rare. He pictured her standing by the piano, arms crossed, eyes wet but fierce. "Why won't you say it, Edward?" she had asked once, long ago. He had stared at the carpet and answered, "You already know." "That's not the point," she had replied. "Sometimes a heart needs to hear it." He had not answered. He had not known how. He walked back to the center of the room, and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The room smelled faintly of old books, furniture polish, and something else, something he associated only with her. It was not a perfume. It was more like the scent of warm fabric, tea, and air that had been lived in with care. He felt a tightness in his chest again. This house remembers everything, he thought. His silence, her questions, their quiet, simple days together. He realized, with a small shiver, that the house remembered better than he wanted to. It did not forget the evenings when she had waited for him to speak, and he had stayed quiet. It did not forget the way she had looked at him with patience, and a hint of sadness. He rubbed his forehead with his fingers. "Margaret," he said, barely louder than a breath, "if you were here now, I think I might finally know what to say." He did not know if that was true. Words still did not come easily, but the pressure inside him was different now. Stronger, harder to push away. He took one last look around the living room. The piano, the chairs, the photographs, the small plant in the corner. Each item pulled at him in a slightly different direction, like gentle hands tugging on a sleeve. He turned and stepped back into the hallway. As he walked toward the bedroom, his hand brushed the wall, fingers trailing lightly over the bumps in the paint. The house was not large, but it was full of their life together. It held their joy, their daily habits, and the one great absence that had stretched on for 40 years. He stopped near the end of the hall and looked back toward the living room. "It remembers everything," he thought again, "even the words I didn't say." The thought followed him as he went to get his coat from the hook by the door. He often walked to the small park a few blocks away. Today, as he slipped his arms into the sleeves, he felt the weight of the house behind him, kind, patient, but honest. It was a place that held his secrets. The walk to the park tired Edward more than usual, so he stopped at a bench near the old oak tree. The air smelled of damp leaves, and the wind carried the faint sound of children playing farther down the path. He sat for a moment, catching his breath, his hands gripping the edge of the wooden seat. But the peace around him could not keep the memory away. Not today. Not when the house had stirred it awake. He felt the past pull at him, steady and insistent, like a tide. He closed his eyes, and the present world faded. The hospital's cold light returned. The smell of antiseptic replaced the scent of the leaves. The soft, steady beep of machines filled the silence. He opened his eyes, but in his mind he was somewhere else entirely. He was back in that room. The room where everything changed. Margaret lay in the narrow hospital bed, her skin pale, her breath shallow. Her once bright eyes looked tired, yet still gentle. Her hair, usually neat and brushed, was tucked behind her ears in soft, uneven strands. Edward had been sitting beside her, back then, just as he imagined himself doing now. His hands had been clasped together, knuckles white, as though he were holding onto something that was slipping away. He remembered the sound of the heart monitor. Its steady rhythm felt like a countdown. Each beep seemed to echo inside his chest. "Edward," Margaret whispered. Her voice had been thin, thread-like, as if she were speaking from far away. He had leaned closer. "Yes, love?" She studied his face, as though trying to memorize every line, every detail. Her fingers moved weakly on the blanket, searching for his. He reached out and took her hand. It felt cold and light, like a small bird resting in his palm. "Your heart," she said, softly, pausing to breathe, "is trying to say something." He remembered how his throat tightened then, how the words rose inside him, sharp and heavy and desperate. But he swallowed them. He always did. "You must rest," he replied. "Don't strain yourself." Margaret shook her head gently, her eyes never leaving his. "No, not rest." She took another breath, slower this time. "Talk to me, Edward." He remembered the way she looked at him, open, patient, pleading without demanding. She had never forced him, never pushed him too far. She simply waited, as if she believed the words were already there, sitting quietly behind his silence. "Margaret." He had said her name, and then stopped. The moment stretched. He could feel her slipping, inch by inch, into a place he could not follow. She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. "Please," she whispered, "tell me what your heart is trying to say." He wanted to tell her everything. How terrified he was. How he could not imagine life without her. How he loved her more fiercely than he had ever dared to admit aloud. How Edward remained on the park bench for several minutes, staring at the ground. The memory felt so real, so close. He could almost hear the soft beeping of the hospital machines in the wind. His throat tightened. The air around him seemed thinner than before. Slowly, he pushed himself up from the bench. His legs felt stiff beneath him, but he managed to stand. He walked home without noticing the trees, the street, or the people he passed. His mind was still trapped in that room from 40 years ago. When he reached his front door, he paused with his hand on the knob, breathing shakily. Then he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The house welcomed him with its usual quiet. But today, the silence felt heavier, like a reminder rather than a comfort. He walked to the living room and sank into his chair. The cushions adjusted beneath his weight as though they remembered him. Across from him, Margaret's chair sat untouched, the blanket draped over its back unmoved since she last placed it there. He looked at it for a long time. Then the memory deepened, sharper now, clearer than the sunlight, slipping across the floor. He was back in the hospital room again. It was evening. The lights were dim, softened by the fading glow from the window. Shadows stretched across the floor. Margaret lay in her bed, breath slow and uneven. The machines beside her hummed with steady, indifferent rhythm. A doctor had just stepped out. "You should have a few minutes alone," the doctor had said gently, before closing the door behind him. Edward remembered watching her chest rise and fall. Each breath looked like an effort. Her eyelids fluttered, as if she were drifting in and out of sleep. Her hand lay loose on the blanket, and he could see how thin her fingers had become. He pulled his chair closer and took her hand very carefully, as though afraid he might hurt her. Her skin felt cool, softer than he remembered. "Margaret," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. No response. Her eyes stayed closed. He swallowed hard. "You're going to be all right," he murmured. A lie. He had known it even then. He leaned closer, his heart pounding. "I'm right here," he said again, forcing the words past the tightness in his throat. For a moment, she stirred. Her eyelids lifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of her tired eyes. She tried to focus on him. "Edward," she breathed. He leaned closer. "Yes, love. I'm here." Her lips trembled. She was trying to speak, but the words came slowly, small, fragile. "Please say it." He felt the familiar panic rise in his chest. He knew what she wanted. He had known all along. 5 words. Simple words. Words he had felt every day of their life together. But when he tried to speak, nothing came. His throat tightened. His chest ached. Fear wrapped around his voice like a fist. "I." He pushed harder. "I." The words shook inside him, trapped and desperate. He felt his eyes water from frustration. Edward did not move from his chair for a long time. The daylight faded slowly, slipping from gold to gray, until the room grew dim. He finally stood with effort, joints stiff, and walked toward the kitchen to make a simple dinner. But before he reached the doorway, the doorbell rang. The sound startled him. It had been days, maybe weeks, since anyone had come to visit. He hesitated for a moment, then shuffled toward the door. His hand hovered over the knob, as if he were unsure whether he wanted to open it at all. But something, habit or politeness, pushed him to turn it. A young woman stood on the porch, bundled in a long coat, her hair pulled back. She looked to be in her early 30s. Her expression was gentle, a little nervous. "Mr. Carter?" she asked. Edward blinked. "Yes, that's me," she exhaled with relief. "I'm glad I found you. My name is Claire." He studied her face, searching his memory. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "I don't believe we've met." "No," she replied with a small smile, "we haven't. But I knew your wife, Margaret." Hearing the name spoken by a stranger struck him like a quiet shock. His breath caught for a second. He swallowed. "You knew Margaret?" Claire nodded. "She was my aunt." Edward opened the door wider, almost without thinking. "Please come in," he said, stepping aside. She entered the living room and looked around with a soft gaze, as though she recognized the space from stories she had once heard. She didn't stare, she simply absorbed the room gently, respectfully. "Would you like tea?" Edward asked automatically. "No, thank you," Claire said kindly. "I won't stay long." He motioned toward the chair opposite his own, Margaret's old chair. Then he froze, realizing what he was doing. "Oh, I'm sorry," he murmured, flustered. "You can sit anywhere you like." Claire smiled with understanding and chose the other chair instead. Edward lowered himself into his seat. His hands trembled slightly on the armrests. "What brings you here?" he asked quietly. Claire reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope yellowed with age, sealed but slightly worn at the corners. "I found this a few weeks ago," she said. "My mother recently passed away, and I've been cleaning her attic." This was in a box of old papers. She held the envelope out toward him. "It's addressed to you," she added, "and it's in Margaret's handwriting." For a moment, Edward just stared at the envelope, not touching it, barely breathing. Margaret's handwriting. After all these years, Edward sat for a long while with the envelope resting on his lap. The house was dim now, touched only by the soft glow from the lamp near the piano. Shadows drifted along the walls, making the room feel both familiar and foreign. The envelope, however, held all of his attention, silent, delicate, impossibly heavy. His fingers trembled as he lifted it once more. He brought it close to his chest, as if he could feel Margaret's warmth through the paper. After a long breath, he finally slid a nail under the seal. The paper split with a soft, fragile sound, a sound that felt like opening a memory. Inside was a single sheet, folded neatly in thirds. He unfolded it with care. Margaret's handwriting flowed across the page in gentle, steady lines, familiar curves, graceful strokes. He had not seen her writing in decades, but the moment he did, the years between them dissolved. It was as though she were sitting beside him again, smoothing the page with her palm and saying, "There, now read." His eyes blurred before he could take in the first words. He blinked until the letters steadied. Then he read, "My dearest Edward, if you're reading this, it means I could not tell you everything I wanted to before my time ran out. Please don't be sad as you read. Think of this as me sitting with you, holding your hands, speaking softly the way I always tried to." Edward exhaled shakily. His thumb brushed the edge of the page, as if touching her words could bring her a little closer. "You have always loved me quietly. I knew that from the first year we were married. You held doors open without saying a word. You made me tea when I was tired. You waited for me in the rain with an umbrella, even when I told you I would be fine on my own." He closed his eyes. He could see all of it. Every small moment she described, moments he never thought she noticed. "You showed your love in your own way. A steady way. A gentle way. I never needed you to speak more than you could." Edward swallowed hard. His chest tightened. Her words were warm, patient, just like she had always been. "But I know those last days were hard for both of us. I could see how afraid you were. You didn't have to say it for me to know I was afraid too. But not of where I was going. I was afraid of leaving you behind with words you wanted to say but couldn't." His breath trembled. He gripped the letter with both hands, now, not trusting his fingers to hold steady. "Edward, you don't owe me any words. You never did. I have always known your heart, even when your voice was quiet. Please don't punish yourself for the silence you lived with. Your love was so much louder than you realized." A tear rolled down his cheek and fell onto the paper, leaving a small dark mark. He quickly wiped it with his sleeve as though afraid to smudge her handwriting. He continued, "You once told me, long ago, that you wished you were braver. But you were brave in ways that mattered. brave in kindness, brave in loyalty, brave in staying beside me when everything grew heavy. I never felt unloved, not even for a moment. Edward's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His shoulders shook. He pressed the page gently against his chest for a moment, before forcing himself to keep reading. If there is one thing I want you to carry after I'm gone, it is this: your silence. Edward kept the letter close for several days. He read it each morning, each evening, and sometimes in the still hours of the night when sleep would not come. Every time, the same warmth settled in his chest, gentle, surprising, almost unfamiliar. But something else began to stir as well. A quiet push, a small, steady pressure from within. Margaret's words lingered in his mind. Please live, truly live. One afternoon, a week after receiving the letter, Edward stood in his living room holding his coat. The day was mild, sunlight slanting through the window in soft golden beams. Dust floated gently in the air. The house looked the same as always, quiet, watchful, full of memories. This time, though, the silence didn't feel as heavy. It felt like a space waiting to be filled. Edward slipped on his coat, buttoned it with slow, careful fingers, and stepped outside. The air touched his cheeks with cool freshness. He walked to the community center 2 blocks away, a place he had passed hundreds of times but rarely entered. The building was old but well kept, with a faded blue sign above the door. He stepped inside. Warm air greeted him, along with the soft murmur of voices. Tables were arranged in a circle, and seniors sat with cups of tea or reading glasses perched on their noses. A volunteer greeted him with a smile. Good afternoon, she said. Are you here for the story-sharing group? Edward hesitated. He hadn't known there was a story-sharing group. But Margaret's words returned to him. Tell someone a story. He nodded. Yes, I suppose I am. She guided him to a seat near the window. The group leader, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, introduced herself as Doris. We share memories here, Doris said. Moments from our lives. Small ones, big ones. Whatever you wish. Would you like to go last, dear? Edward nodded again, relieved. His heart was beating faster than usual. The group began. One man talked about fishing with his father. A woman shared a memory of her first job in a bakery. Another recalled the day she adopted her dog. They laughed. Some cried softly. Some simply listened. Edward listened too. The stories settled into him like warm blankets, one layered on top of the other. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. He felt present. When the last person finished, Doris looked at him gently. Would you like to share something, Edward? The room fell quiet. All eyes turned toward him, not demanding, not prying, just waiting. His fingers tightened around the folded letter in his coat pocket. He took a breath. Perhaps, he said softly. I might try. He leaned forward slightly. His voice trembled as he began. My wife's name was Margaret, he said. A few people nodded with small smiles, encouraging. She was patient, kind, stronger than she looked. He paused, searching for words that had lived inside him for years, but rarely left his lips. I loved her, very much, but I wasn't good at saying so, not in words. The group remained silent, but the silence felt warm like hands, gently cupping the moment. He continued. When she was very sick, she asked me for something. 5 simple words. His throat tightened. I couldn't say them, not when she needed them. A woman across the circle dabbed at her eyes. Edward inhaled, the breath shaky but steadying. The next morning arrived with a soft gray sky. Edward woke before sunrise, as he often did, but something inside him felt different. Lighter, calmer, almost steady in a way he had not felt in 40 years. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, listening to the silence. It did not crush him today. It waited. He reached for Margaret's photograph on the nightstand, and held it gently, brushing a thumb over the familiar smile. I'm going out for a while, he whispered to her. His voice trembled, but not from sorrow this time. It trembled with purpose. He dressed slowly, choosing his warmer coat, and slipped the letter into the inside pocket, close to his heart. He stepped outside into the cool morning. The air smelled faintly of dew and distant chimneys. The town was quiet at this hour. A few lights glowed behind curtains. Birdsong drifted softly through the air. Edward walked with slow, deliberate steps down the sidewalk, past the little bakery, past the row of mailboxes, past the park, where he had relived so many memories. He turned down a familiar path, the one he had avoided for years, the one that led to the cemetery. As he entered through the old iron gate, he paused. The grounds were peaceful, bathed in pale morning light. Rows of stones stretched out before him, each one a story, a life. A voice once heard. Edward walked between them, taking his time, as though each step needed grounding. His breath came out in soft clouds. The grass brushed lightly against his shoes. Finally, he reached her. Margaret Carter, beloved wife, forever loved. He stood before her stone, feeling the quiet settle around him like a gentle blanket. He touched the top edge of the stone, with careful fingers, brushing away a few fallen leaves. "Good morning, Margaret," he said softly. His voice was steady. "I brought something." He took the letter from his coat pocket and held it up for a moment, then placed it at the base of the stone, tucked safely between two flowers. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze. "She forgave me," he whispered. "You forgave me." He knelt slowly, his knees protesting, but he didn't mind. He rested his hand on the cool stone, breathing deeply. For a few seconds, he simply stayed there, eyes closed, feeling the weight of memory settle and lift at the same time. Then he opened his eyes and looked at her name, etched forever in the stone. "Margaret," he said, his voice barely above a breath. "I need to tell you something." He swallowed hard. His chest tightened not with fear, but with emotion long held back. His fingers trembled lightly on the stone. "I should have said it then," he continued, "when you were looking at me, waiting. I should have said it every day." The wind rustled through the nearby trees, a soft whisper passing through the branches. Edward didn't move. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching the stone. "I can't live without you," he said. The 5 words came out clearly, slow, trembling, but strong. He closed his eyes tightly as tears slipped down his cheeks. Not sharp tears of guilt this time. Softer tears, tears of release. The words hovered in the cold morning air, no longer trapped inside him. He had spoken them at last. He stayed there for a long moment, letting the quiet hold him. The world around him felt still, peaceful, acknowledging the words he had finally freed. "I love you," he whispered next, simple, honest, unafraid.